All right, welcome back, my beautiful people, to this week's STR News and Digest. Today, we're going to be diving into some of the latest updates in the short-term rental industry, specifically what the FTC is doing in regards to junk fees. We're also going to dive into Marriott's move into the outdoor accommodation space. And I find that interesting, especially if you guys are looking to do something different, looking to somewhat gamble like we are. I'm going to dive into this in a second as to what's trending in the accommodation space and why Marriott is deciding to move into the space. We're also going to dive into Spain's battle with Airbnb. I touched on this information in a couple of digests before in terms of their push for regulations and their belief on how they think they can solve the over tourism in some major cities. We're going to dive into that in a second. We're also going to dive into some very important warnings by the State Department as it relates to travel to specific destination. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is the second to the last week of the year. We're going to dive into our numbers. We're going to dive into what we're doing. I'm going to show you some updates on some of the stuff that we are currently, that we're working on specifically. Anyway, let's dive right in, and the first topic I want to talk about that I just mentioned is the new FTC announcement, right? And on December 17th this year, they announced what they're referring to as the junk fee rule. Now, what is that, right? And I'm going to read it right off the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission, right off their website. And the Federal Trade Commission has finalized its groundbreaking junk fee rule, targeting deceptive pricing practices across the industry, including the short-term rentals. Announced on December 17, the rule mandates that businesses disclose the total price, inclusive of all mandatory fees. Now, that's important to understand. Whenever prices are advertised. This shift could significantly impact short-term rental managers and operators and their pricing strategy. So we're going to explore that now. The FTC has been trying to do this. I know California was ahead of the game in terms of this. They already passed a rule which is called true pricing or whatever it is in California. I try not to even think about California, or I definitely try not to do business in California. It's so difficult to deal with all their liberal policies, but as a rule, here's what the junk fee rule will eliminate, or it's supposed to eliminate, right? They don't want any hidden mandatory fees. So if you have a mandatory fee in your short-term rental, that has to be displayed up front before someone books. Now, what's included in that, right? What's included in that's your cleaning fee. That needs to be displayed before. Most of you guys don't have a problem with this because most of these cleaning fees are listed before they book the property. It's going to be listed in their totals, right? Some of the stuff that some other fees will be resort fees if you're operating in let's say a condo environment or I don't want to say resort, but condo environment, apartment environment in which there's going to be a fee, or these condo hotels where there definitely is a resort fee, that needs to be displayed beforehand. Any service fees needs to be displayed. Now, optional fees or add-ons, and this is where it kind of gets a little gray, but my suggestion to you is to as much as you can, to put this out there. So add-on fees for optional services, such as pet fees, early check-in charges, are not banned, right? They're not part of this, but must be clearly disclosed before a consumer completes their purchases, right? These charges cannot be hidden or misleading labels, right? Or labeled in a misleading kind of way. Now, we have all these fees, right? And we're going to have to adjust because currently, right now, these optional fees are upsales. They're located once someone bucks. But a couple of things that we're going to change, because some of this stuff, I don't think it's related. I don't think it's going to be an issue. Now, I highly suggest that you get with your local expert or an attorney that specializes in this so they can really clarify in your specific area. But for example, we have it in our listing that there's an additional, and we don't charge for pets. It's an additional cleaning fee if someone bringing the pet, right? But that's listed in the description, and it's listed before someone books. The other thing that we have listed in the description, which isn't a fee, but they have an option to pay something, which is our security deposit. And if the property has a waiver eligibility, then that waiver is there. But that's also listed in the description prior to someone booking. What's not listed for us will be some add-ons like in-stay cleaning, any concierge service, any car rentals, all that's there's stuff that we offer. For example, kayaks, bike rentals, all that stuff is not listed prior to. What we're going to do, and this is what we've been advised to do, is in the listing description to state that additional amenities such as, and we're going to put it on there, such as bike rentals, kayak rentals, car rentals are going to have an additional fee. Now, we're not going to list every other amenity, but it's going to state that additional amenities not listed in the listing, right, are going to have an upcharge. So that's kind of going to or should cover you. But again, highly recommend that you get with an attorney that understands this new rule with FTC so that you're not violating this rule, because I have a feeling that it can cause you problems down the road if you get a lot of complaints. I don't think, if you get one or two complaints, you're going to have an issue. But if you get a lot of them, you probably will. Now, what's in the rule, right? The rule states transparent pricing is the priority, right? The most prominent price displayed must be the all-in total price, covering all mandatory fees like resort fees, cleaning fees, and service fees. This eliminates price or drip pricing, which is what they're trying to avoid, right? They don't want drip pricing. In addition to that, what they don't want to do is, or what they're trying to avoid is the surprises that happen once someone books. So if you have that pricing strategy in which you only put the rental rate and don't put anything else, so that when someone sees it, you're the lowest price property, and let's say we're looking at Airbnb, those pricing strategies are out the window. Don't do that anymore because it's going to cause you problems. So whatever the total price is going to be, make sure that's listed ahead of time. And here's the thing: some platforms are not going to allow you to put all these upcharges and mandatory fees in there. So make sure in the description you have some type of verbiage that I mentioned already. Right? Make sure you have that. The optional fees must be clearly disclosed, as I've already talked about. The global context and learning from Europe. Europe has already had this. Europe has already had a mandatory clear pricing across all online travel agencies or OTAs. Platforms like Airbnb, Expedia, Booking.com display all-in prices to comply with the consumer protection laws. And in the US, however, only Airbnb has voluntarily adopted the similar practice. That's key there. I've said this before. We are truly our worst enemy. In my prior life, as I like to mention, when I worked for the government, we used to say that every policy had someone's name on it. I'll give you an example. When I first, now it's been 35 years ago, but when I first got into government work, My policy manual was literally about this big, this thing. By the time I retired and left, it was so big that they no longer printed it. It was in a digital file in terms of policies. And every single policy was a result of someone effing up, right? Someone making a mistake. In the short-term rental industry, we're starting to see that. A lot of these regulations are coming about because we're not being professional. We're allowing stuff to happen in our properties that we shouldn't, like large parties. You know, if you're investing in a residential home, in a quiet residential neighborhood, you know, you have to respect your neighbors. And if you're allowing chaos on your properties, this is what's going to happen, right? These government entities are going to try to control and regulate that, and you're going to have some unnecessary regulations, and oftentimes they're not going to benefit you. So now let's go into how this is going to affect us, right? So the new rule demands significant changes to how rental managers display pricing is what you need to know, right? Cleaning fees and beyond. What you must change. And I've already talked about the stuff that you need to put on. We talked about the transparency, or, you know, be transparent or you're going to be penalized. But monitoring changes on OTAs. Third-party platforms like Vrbo, Expedia will need to comply with the new rules, adjusting how they display pricing. So stay informed, stay in contact with them so that if they're going to make any changes, that you're aware of those changes so it doesn't affect you, affect you in the long run. Now, the rules are scheduled to take effect 120 days after the publication, which was on the 17th. However, it's a long-term, so it's not really set in stone yet, because the Republican FTC Commissioner Andrew Ferguson has not really ruled on this yet and criticized it as an overreach. So it might change, right? It might change. But hypothetically, the Trump administration comes in and changes it and says, hey, that's overreach, too restricted. I don't want that. But people, hear me out, man. This is the plea between you and I. Don't be that guy, right? Don't try to scam people. Don't try to hide stuff and then throw it out there at the last minute, especially those of you that have strict refund policies. Now, you're going to lose because, especially if it's Airbnb and they're not aware of any additional pricing, Airbnb is already complying with this. You're going to lose. But it just makes us all look bad when you're trying to be sneaky and you're trying to do what I refer to as unethical stuff, right? Be professional. You know, put yourself in that traveler's shoes. Make sure that when your guest is going to book, that they understand what they're paying for and what they're going to get, right? Anyway, let's move on to the next story. Next story we're going to talk about is Spain, right? There's a big battle right now going on between Spain and not just Airbnb, because it really encompasses all OTAs, but for some reason they are specifically targeting Airbnb. In fact, let me read what was printed in some of their news articles, right? Spain has launched an investigation into Airbnb. I want to be specific. It's just Airbnb. They didn't do it for Booking or Vrbo, but Airbnb, for allegedly failing to remove thousands of rental listings that lacked proper tourism licensing, aiming and these licenses and these regulations, according to Spain, the reason they have them is because they're trying to address the over-tourism and the housing shortage. Now, I'm not going to get on my soapbox again about this, their pretense as to Airbnb or short-term rentals are the cause of over-tourism and shortage. Because once again, if you watch any of my past STR News where I got on my soapbox, the numbers and the facts aren't there. They're just not. But what is true, though, is that in Spain, just like in many other jurisdictions, there are illegal short-term rentals. But again, I don't know why they're targeting specifically Airbnb, especially in Spain, since Airbnb is not the largest OTA in Europe. It's booking.com. But there's a threat of them to fine them, and the fines are pretty hefty. So here's what it is. These listings are considered illegal advertising under the regional regulation, which requires all short-term rental advertising to display a valid license number. The regulatory push isn't limited to Airbnb, but Airbnb is the one that is currently being threatened for the fine, right? The Consumers' Right Ministry has emphasized that platforms must adhere to local regulations. Non-compliance can result in fines up to 100,000 euros or 4 to 6 times the profit from the displayed listing, right? Airbnb argued that it should be classified as an information society service under the EU law, emphasizing its role as the platform connecting hosts and guests rather than a traditional real estate operator. So there's some legal stuff that they're trying to do, or Airbnb is trying to do with some of the laws. In fact, they're getting backing from the EU Tourism Board in terms of, the tourism board is on board with Airbnb, and they're backing them up, saying that some of the stuff is too restricted and it violates EU law. We'll see how that plays out in the courts. But for right now, understand that Spain, and I'm sure others are going to follow suit, they are taking a very tough stance on short-term rentals and introducing very strict rules, increasing taxes, doing rental limits, all these crazy stuff that's happening in Europe in the industry. So let's move on to the next story. The next story is, and this one is interesting to me, right? And here's what it is. Marriott ventures outdoors with there's a partnership with two entities. One is called the Postcard Cabins, and the other one is the Trailborne, and they're calling the partnership, right? And I'll read what they wrote. Marriott International has announced its expansion into outdoor-focused accommodations by partnering with two experimental, let me say that again, experimental travel brands. And I've already talked about the brand, Postcard Cabins and Trailborne, right? So if you're not familiar with like Postcard Cabins, they're a national brand. I don't know if they're international. Let's see if they're international. No, they're not international. They're a national brand, but they're all over the place. They're in place, like, for example, in the Northeast, they're in Boston, New York, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, DC. In the Southeast, where I'm at, Atlanta, Charlotte, Nashville, New Orleans, and Orlando, all part of this brand. And basically what they are is these cabins in either a forest, in the outdoors, right? So, but the interesting part is that Marriott is seeing the trends. Let me go back to the article so we can actually talk about it in greater detail. So let me continue reading the article because it's actually listed here, right? Postcard, previously known as Getaway, operates over 1,200 cabins across 29 outposts in the United States, providing secluded stays in private woodlands within easy reach of major cities. Now, here's what's interesting. Now, most of you guys, if you've been following my channel, I've been talking about this. I'm moving into this space. We experimented with this stuff in Colombia. If you're on my Instagram, you're already seeing some of the stuff that we did there. There's a new project in Buga, which is about an hour away from Cali, Colombia. It's called the Eco Hotel El Diamond Resort, or Hacienda, right? Where we're creating this type of outdoor accommodations. We did some in Salento, Colombia. I talked about Doug's Showens Place in Gunther, Alabama. Timbercrafts is creating this type of environment as well. That's called the Highlands. They've been featured on my channel before. We're creating this type of resort in my property in Georgia, and we have plans to expand this to North Carolina, Georgia, and we're expanding even more, like I just talked about, in Colombia. Now, what's interesting here is that, it's been noted that 70% of travelers, now this is a big number, people, 70% of travelers are looking to reconnect with nature. Expedia emphasizes a growing demand for alternative accommodation in proximity to outdoor attractions. And there's a huge increase, or predicted, in 2025. Very interesting, people. If you're looking to do something different, invest into something different, get into a different market, this is it. I've already mentioned this before on prior STR News, even in my other podcasts, about the fact that I'm no longer investing in residential homes to convert into short-term rental. I'm not doing that anymore. It's getting too complicated. It's very oversaturated. I don't know where this regulation thing is going to end up at. So I'm staying away from that. What we are investing in, if you guys are interested in learning more, then buy me a coffee. We can talk about it. If you want to invest in some of the projects we're doing, we are taking on some investors, but they're going to be strategic investors. We can get into that during a phone conversation. Again, if you buy me a coffee, we can talk about it. But here's where we're investing in, because this is where I think you won't have any issues, and this is where I think the market is going. We already talked about these outdoor accommodations, these glamping type deals. Now, some of the accommodations we are investing in, like our couples resort, it's not really glamping because we're not putting up tents or even the geodome. Now we are building some geodomes, but we're building more some of these tiny cottages or tiny homes to put into these couples resort. But nonetheless, they're all going to be outdoor based. For example, my property in Georgia, I've already talked about this, but I'm going to repeat it. My property in Georgia, we're going to have 3 separate accommodations: a geodome, a cottage, and a treehouse. Those are going to be the 3 accommodations. We have a 4th, which is a converted barn, but I don't know if I'm actually going to rent out the barn. I think what I'm going to do with that barn is use the barn as a restaurant and social area. We're going to put a bar, food. We're going to be serving breakfast and dinner. We're not going to be doing lunch, but that's more of the idea. I'm leaning towards the barn. We're still not there yet. We're still trying to decide what we want to do that. But nonetheless, going back to the concept, we're going to have the 3 separate accommodations: the geodome, the cottage, and the treehouse. But once you get to our property, which is over 100 acres, 42 of it is developed. The other one's going to be all woodlands. But once you get there, you're going to have all sorts of outdoor activity. As I mentioned, you're going to have horseback riding, mountain bike trails, ATV trails, archery, axe throwing. There's going to be a lot of outdoor social areas, fire pit. We're going to have the 3 accommodations are going to have a jacuzzi, sauna. We're thinking about even adding a cold plunge in there. But let me go back. There's also going to be experiences like wine tasting. This is at my vineyard, and we're partnering up with several other wineries in our area so that you can either start in our place. There's going to be other accommodations. There's also, we're doing a partnership with it's like an experience farm, so you can see how they farm, pet their animals, etc. But the idea here is that we're going to have a lot of outdoor activities for our guests, and it's really meant for couples that like to be active when they vacation. Just like me, I am not a person. This is why I'm not a big fan of going to like cruises that are catered to older couples, because there's not the activities that I like. I like outdoor activities. I like to go running. I like to go mountain biking. I like to, like in our case, you're going to have the ability to do some archery, some axe throwing. But what's interesting here is, and it's I've been mentioning this before. It looks like it's a trend. What's very interesting is that Marriott's jumping on board, people. You know, Marriott has a lot more money than me. They have a lot more experts in the accommodation business. And if they're doing it, why not me, right? So let's go on to the next story. Just make sure I got everything here. The State Department, right? So let's talk about the State Department's warnings. I mentioned it before. State Department is still warning people from going to Haiti. So if you have any plans of going to Haiti, don't go to Haiti. And then now they added some warnings in Mexico and Honduras. So for example, this is really geared more towards, or not geared more towards, but this also applies for cruises. If you haven't noticed, cruises eliminated their protocol in Honduras. They're no longer going there. They're also limiting and probably eliminating some stops in Mexico. So I highly recommend that if you're going to be going to either Honduras, Mexico, that you go onto the State Department and see which places are no-go zones and which ones have been elevated to a higher warning. There's a lot, hence why I'm not going to mention all the protocols and all the cities that are listed in the State Department. But the State Department, my travel agency has been getting a lot of these advisories, and every time we get a new one, they add a different city from Mexico to this list. So I haven't been to Mexico in a little bit, but now I don't plan to go to. But if you're planning there, do care, because something's going on and it's getting kind of crazy in those areas. Now, let's get into last week's numbers. Let me share my screen. All right, last week we brought in 40,000, a little over 40,000, which is a decline from the prior week of 5.2%. We had 269 books. It's also a decline of 11%. Our occupancy rate, it's at 70. It's a decline from last week by 10%. Our average daily rate is up by 6% to $154, and RevPAR is 108. So next week, which will be the last STR News of the year, I'm going to give you the whole year's numbers, and you'll see how we did from last year to this year. And I'm also going to show you the whole month of December. It really has been a great month. And as I predicted, based on the data that I've shared with you guys in the past, I knew that November, December was going to be good. And I anticipate that the Q1 of 2025 is going to be better than Q1 of 2024. So the numbers really, really look good. And even if you look at the chart here, as you can see, we took this is the week, right? We started here, we took this little bit of a dip, but it is constantly going up and it hasn't stopped. So you're going to see that the numbers for this week that we're currently entering are phenomenal, and you'll see the whole month how good it was in comparison to November and the December of last year. Now, Airbnb came in, I don't know if they're number one. Yeah, and number one at 17.29. Booking is at 11.1. We're at 6.35. Marriott is at 2.57, and all others at 2.77. We have kind of a big, in terms of RevPAR, 223, 267, 91 for all others. We've got 212 and 222. So RevPAR was really good throughout a lot of our properties. Again, you're going to see this even more next week when we talk about it. Now, it has been a crazy, crazy month. And I'm going to give you a lesson. And this is, for those of you that are still here, you're really going to reap the benefits of what I'm about to talk about, because it's extremely important if you are a short-term rental operator. And it's a lesson for me, because even though we've had a decent 2024, there's a reason why it wasn't great. And I thought it was because of the drop in terms of occupancies, but it really wasn't. And so here's what happened. I do an end of the year audit in December every year. We're going to change that now. We're going to do audits every quarter, because here's what ended up happening. In the beginning of 2023, I'm sorry, let me take it back. In December of 2023, we changed how we do our calculations and our owner's report. Meaning, our owner's report, the way it was done before we added it to an automated system, it was done by our bookkeepers in an Excel spreadsheet that was inputted into our PMS system. And then the PMS system created these owner's report. With our PMS system, that became automated, but it had to be created, or the formulas needed to be created. When we did the formulas and we created that initial report, we failed miserably to include one very important component, which is the OTA host service fees. Now, in our management contracts, the host service fees are paid by the owner. It's what, for example, Airbnb, Booking, Vrbo, what they charge us to advertise on their platforms. Now, that fee varies on the platform. So, for example, Airbnb for us, because we are a management company, our fee is only 3%. Booking, I believe it's 5%, but it varies per platform. We screwed up and didn't add that formula in our calculations when we did our owner's report. So as a result, that fee was being paid not by the owners, but by us. Huge mistake. The numbers, or the amount, because we're such a large company, was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we were paying, that we should have stayed with us. So a lot of money that we lost. So as a lesson, people, highly recommend that you do quarterly audits of your company and not extended. And I don't know why we didn't do it sooner. We've always done it in December, the end of the year. But going forward, we're changing that, because I could have spot this early on and didn't have this massive loss that we had. Now we're going to recoup this money, because we have to go back to the owners and tell the owners, hey, this is what happened. Here are the actual reports, so they can see, because transparency in these cases are paramount. You really need to be super transparent in this. We're going to show them. And interesting part is, we missed it. The owners missed it, because no one ever mentioned that we weren't charging them when we charged them in the past. And my staff and my managers missed it when they were reviewing some of these reports. So it was a total failure across the board. But again, if we would have been doing quarterly audits, we would have found it instead of a yearly audit. Yeah, it's going to be more work. It's going to cost you a little bit more money because you have to pay the people to do the audits on a quarterly basis. But I am here to tell you that you're going to save money and not have these crazy swings that we just had. So as a lesson, make sure that you do quarterly audits and not wait like we did. Well, that's going to be it for now. If you have any questions, any comments, list them below. Follow me on Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram, subscribe. More than 82% of the people watching don't subscribe to this channel. So subscribe. Love you guys. See you on the next one.